Today we're going to discuss converter stall speed and some of the misconceptions related to that. If you pick up your normal hot rod catalog, turn to the converter page, you see all the converters usually have a rated stall speed, whether that's 2500 or 3600. That stall speed that they're rated at is only correct at a given amount of horsepower and torque in a car of a certain amount of weight. You can't just order a 3600 converter and it always be 3600 stall behind every motor or car you put it in. A given combination of parts would give you that stall at a certain horsepower. A lot of times the rated horsepower is rated behind a 400 or 450 horsepower combo. If you were to put that given converter that stalls 3600 at 450 horsepower in a car that makes 800 horsepower, it's going to go to well over 4,000 stall. If the motor's low on power because your elevation is higher, say you guys that race in Denver, a converter that's rated at 3600 may only go to 3000 because your motor's not making the power at that elevation. What you have to remember is power affects the stall. They're hand in hand, and it doesn't separate. If you've got a converter and the power changes, the stall is going to change. Next thing we wanted to discuss is all the different features of a converter and the different ways they're built with variations of parts for different levels of horsepower and single disc versus triple disc.
People think that if you get a 3000 converter that you have to go to 3000 RPM before the car will start to move. That's not true. The 3000 is based off of true stall, so that's full power, full boost, full nitrous, wide open throttle down the track. Obviously, off idle, taking off from a red light, your car is not going to make all 600 horsepower. So it's going to drive like normal, but when you give it the gas, it's going to flash up to what the true stall actually is. When selecting a converter for your car, you really need to call a shop and have one built to your vehicle. Because the stuff you buy online from your normal catalog, it's based off of approximate horsepower. There's one set type of car they base it off of. There's a million options when it comes to converters. They range in size all the way from here's an 8-inch and here's an 11-inch. This is more for your dragster, your track only car. You're going to be in the 5,000 plus stall speed. This we do a lot more for the guy that wants a 2500 or a big heavy truck or something along those lines. And to go along with that, there's little things you can have done. Like, this is the same stator. One's been milled, one hasn't. This loosens it up a little bit, it's a little more efficient. This is factory, basically. And same thing goes with like a turbo versus nitrous car. This works good for a nitrous car. This works good for a turbo car. You can get the same stall speed, but the way you make the power varies. So you want a nitrous car a little bit tighter, so whenever you hit the nitrous, you're not blowing through it. You want a turbo car a little bit looser, so you can spool it up, but you don't want blowing through on the top end. So you fix that by the proper combination of parts. Then to go with that, this is your factory roller that comes in all the stators. You can swap the inside out for a different spline for like a Turbo 400 versus an 80. Somebody using a lot of nitrous, it's called spragless. It makes it one solid piece. It doesn't turn. It's there. It ain't going nowhere. Turbo cars, this is what you call a diode. Whenever you get up on the top end, you start to get efficiency. It'll allow the stator to unlock and turn with everything else.
I'm going to discuss differences in converter construction today. One common converter that you'll see in the performance world is the 245 millimeter. It's a real versatile core that's used by almost every, well, that's probably used by every converter builder that's building performance stuff. Some of these converters they're cut apart. In the stock front cover that we have here, you have a kit that you mount a ring to that cover. That's what we call our budget series. When it's put together and complete, it looks more like this. This one's actually not welded, but that's the complete setup. That's a pretty good setup for less than 600 horsepower, naturally aspirated, non-lockup setups. Good bracket race converter. It's a real good, street performance converter in a mild combo. It works okay even behind big blocks. You're just going to end up with the stall is going to progressively go up with more power. It's a fairly small converter core, but it can be used for everything from about a 300 horsepower combo to a 1,000 horsepower combo, built accordingly. The same size core with a more rugged cover is the billet cover setup like we have here. We build more of these here at Jake's Performance, but they're a little better for a nitrous application, especially if you're spraying more than 100, 150 shot. The billet cover is a lot more robust, and you can also get a balloon plate on the front side, that, like we have here, that keeps the converter from ballooning under a big shot of nitrous or real heavy combo. That's a real good setup. It's a little more costly because of the additional expense of the cover. We built quite a few of those. This is a 265 billet cover for a non-lockup, a Turbo 400 Power Glide. That would be a bigger power combo because it's a larger core. Something, well north of 1,000 horsepower, probably up closer to the 15 to 2,000 horsepower, unless we were looking for a real low stall. Some of the off-road stuff, we would use this to keep the stall low and still have a good performance setup. Moving on from there, the non-lockup converters would go to the lockup. The 245 stuff, you can buy the budget converters that have the original size clutch in them. It's an extremely small clutch. We really don't like to build those. We usually avoid that. If anybody's making any kind of power at all, we usually don't build that for them. We'd go on to a single disc billet converter. It has a substantially larger clutch capacity, and it also has the more rigid billet cover, so that the mating surface for the clutch doesn't warp as easy as the little lightweight stamped steel cover that the factory used. I'll let Josh show you the triple disc here. That's the next step up. The triple disc is a requirement to use when you're wanting to lock the converter up at heavy or wide open throttle. It's also very popular for the diesel guys and the towing guys that are towing heavy loads, because it has a substantially larger holding capacity when you're towing or making big power, to hold the clutch and not allow it to slip and burn the clutch up, taking out the converter and the transmission. One thing I'll add is a lot of converter companies, they know you're not going to see the inside of a converter, so when you actually cut a converter open here, a lot of converter shops, when you cut open a converter, sometimes they're advertised as being TIG welded. TIG welded, to me, means that the fins are TIG welded into the pump like this. And they can be welded here, and here's where we like to weld them. You can also weld here for additional strength. Some companies don't do anything to brace that up. Some companies furnace braze, which is also a good option. It's not quite as rigid as actually TIG welding the fins, but it does brace it all together a little better. You got to beware. Some companies are selling you something that you're paying for a service that's not complete, and we've seen that a lot in the industry. So we prefer to go ahead and TIG weld those in on anything that's making. Pretty much, if it's a performance converter, that should be done. That's our thoughts on the subject.